Awesome. Like he said, he's Bob Ellis. This is our weekly interview series, and we're sitting down with someone who is just doing a lot of cool things out there. Like you said, you can find your articles on WordPress. You can find yourself on Instagram. You got an awesome Facebook group with just all kinds of people sharing, Earnhardt stuff, photos, all that kind of stuff. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Now that we have our technical difficulties over with, all on my end, by the way. No, I'm doing great. It's nice weather out, and you can't complain too much. How about yourself?
Oh yeah, doing good. Some nice weather outside. I guess jumping into it, Bob. When did you first become a Dell Earnhardt fan?
Oh man, I got to tell you, I was a NASCAR fan before I was a Dale Earnhardt fan. So as a little kid, I had this Richard Petty plastic car. It was about this big, and man, I shot that thing all over the house. And whenever Wide World of Sports would show a little clip of NASCAR, I was always watching it. And then 1979 happened, right? The Daytona 500, the big snowstorm in the Northeast, and everybody was locked in. And we that was the only entertainment on TV that Sunday. And I got to watch NASCAR flag to flag. And yeah, that was a great finish, and I was good fan of NASCAR. And there was that blue and white car out there, blue and yellow car out there, and I was like, that guy could drive. And I was like 11 or 12 years old, and so I started watching for him a little bit more over the years. And yeah, right around the time 1981 when he switched over to Richard Childress, I started to become a bit more of a fan because, well, I liked the car, I liked the way he drove, and 3 was my number. So and then he went to Bud Moore, and I was like, he's trying to Ford, he's in number 15, but I still stayed with him. And then I was so happy when he came back to the number 3. And yeah, and then right after he came back is when I became a diehard Earnhardt fan. I was a casual fan up until 1984. Yeah.
That's awesome. So for you as a fan, nowadays Earnhardt, it's just super popular. You hear all these stories, but whenever you speak to a fan who was a fan back in the 80s or even early 90s, there was times where Earnhardt, if he moved someone, he would get booed out of a place or whatever. Like, so for you, did you have a time where it wasn't the most popular thing to be a Dale Earnhardt fan?
I got well, none of my friends are Earnhardt fans, so there you go. But I, I didn't really. NASCAR fans, for the most part, are good people, and whether you're an Earnhardt fan or an Allison fan or a Rusty Wallace fan, there are a few of them out there. No, and but you know what? We all give each other a hard time, but in the end, it wasn't that bad or awkward to be an Earnhardt fan, as much as it would have been to be any other fan. However, when Dale did stuff that people didn't agree with, he had a larger target on him. But with success, that's what you get, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if he was a back runner who was taking provisionals all the time to get in, nobody would be booing him, right? So you got to have success to have that kind of reaction from the crowd. You either liked them or you hated them, right? At that point, right? Late
Yeah.
80s, early 90s. You were either an Earnhardt fan or you hated Earnhardt. There was no in between. But the fans themselves, every time I was in the stands or whatever, we all treated each other well, so that's good.
So jumping into this, I found you due to the stumbling upon the Dell Earnhardt Archives, and like I said, what's cool about it is that it's not just a photo thing. It's not sitting in front of a camera and just talking about this or that. It's just so much to it, with the especially the writing. So how did the idea first come about that you wanted to do something, with with Dale Earnhardt, sharing, I guess, diving into it? And do you have like a writing background as well, or?
Um, okay, well, I'll separate the two. I'll start with
Yeah,
start
there's a
with
lot. Yeah, a lot
yeah.
being thrown.
I'll start prior to the archive, and then I'll talk about the archive itself. I do not have a degree in journalism or anything like that. I'm actually a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an 8th grade teacher, which is I have fun at it. At that I do, it's great. NASCAR is my hobby,
Mm-hmm.
and back in the late '90s, I started this NASCAR pool mostly just for my friends. There was like maybe 20 of us in there, and we were just it was just bragging rights. It worked out to about $1 a race, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was just more something to talk about. And so after each race, I would release the current standings, and I would write a blurb about the race and what to look for and stuff like that. And a couple of my friends were like, "Man, you should write. You should write about this stuff." And I'm like, "Whatever." And so after Dale died, I kind of walked away from the sport for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple years later, I came back, and the sport was still there. The sport was still doing great, and I found that I still liked the sport. But I've never ever invested into another driver again.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a fan of the sport, and I'm still a fan of the sport. I don't have a favorite driver,
Mm-hmm.
and so and I'm still running the pool, and I thought, you know what? I want to write. I want to do this. So I started my own blog, and my blog was called NASCAR Ranting and Raving.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the very first NASCAR blogs out there within the first couple of years when this whole blogging thing took off in
Yeah.
the mid around 2005, right? And the blogging community was great. They received me well. To this day, I'm still in contact with a bunch of the other people that we were blogging with, and that blogging opportunity led to lots of stuff. I became one of the first. My site became one of the first NASCAR citizen journalists,
Mm-hmm.
which gave us media passes, and
Wow.
we fell under the NASCAR umbrella. And that was a big thing. Here I am, like an 8th grade teacher. Now I have media credentials with NASCAR. I mean, it wasn't hard card. I still had
Mm-hmm.
to apply for each race, but I was pretty darn cool. And then other opportunities opened up. My local newspaper contacted me and said, "We want you to write a column." So I became a NASCAR columnist for a newspaper that had a daily circulation of about 250,000 newspapers.
Wow.
So I was like, yeah. So then I was like, this is pretty cool. And then I got contacted by SB Nation, Sports Blogs Nation, and they wanted me to move my NASCAR Ranting and Raving into their domain. So I did. And then things kind of took off a little bit more from there. I hired this, there was this guy, he was in university or college, and he was like, always writing stuff in the comments and whatever. And I finally said to him, I go, "Listen, dude, you want to write for me?" And he was like, "Yeah, okay." Well, that was Matt Weaver.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Matt Weaver started writing for me. And then I wanted a vlogger. I wanted some video content as
Mm-hmm.
well. I wanted a video voice. And there was this new video person that came out, and she was doing a half decent job on YouTube. She had just started out. She'd only been out for a couple months, and that was Caitlin Vincey.
Oh,
And I said,
wow.
"Hey, Caitlin, you want to come over here with me?" And Caitlin was like, "Yeah, all right." So Caitlin came over, and she started doing weekly vlogs for me.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt's doing some writing for me. And then that whole Winston Cup scene The newspaper kind of got canceled. They moved to
Yeah.
digital. They let go of a whole lot of guys. And Tyler, the guy who runs SBN, him and I had talks about how could we generate a better NASCAR audience. And I said to Tyler, I go, look, they just, this website newspaper thing, they just let go of one of their good writers, Jeff Gluck. You should get him. So Jeff Gluck came over. Now he had his own deal going on, but
yeah,
they got Gluck over. And then Matt and Gluck kind of teamed up, and Gluck mentored him. And, you know where Matt Weaver is now, and you know where Jeff is, and you know where Caitlin is. And they all came through NASCAR Ranting and Raving. And then something really bad happened to NASCAR Ranting and Raving. SB Nation started to go a different direction, and they decided to leave NASCAR behind. So they gave me my walking papers, as it were, but they didn't tell me they released my domain until after they released the domain, and somebody in Russia picked it up, and I lost my site. Lawyers have been involved and nothing's happened. So somebody in Russia has now claimed my site. They've had it for about 10 years now.
I'm assuming there's not that much.
About 8 years.
I'm assuming there's not too much NASCAR content on there.
Well, there is, but there's all it is press releases and copied stuff from other areas.
Okay.
So I kind of stopped writing for a little bit, and then I got in with I started writing for another blogger friend of mine, and Charlie Turner, and that was on Pit Row. That he had a site, and then he turned that into a digital magazine, which was cool. We were cutting edge. So it was like a magazine. You could turn the pages, right, like in your Kindle.
Yeah.
And but it had animation in it and video content, and it was really cool. And we lasted about 4 or 5 issues, and I don't know the exact story, but there were some time constraints on the editors, and publishing dates weren't being met by certain individuals, and it kind of went by the wayside, and Charlie went on to do other stuff. And then I was like in limbo land, wasn't writing for anybody, wasn't doing anything, still had an opinion. And then I was like, well, I don't want to do this blog thing again, because, you know, that's a lot of commitment. And so I thought, oh, what do I want to write about? What interests me? Well, Dale Earnhardt interests me. He always has. And I had been scouring pictures off the internet for years. Every time I find a cool Dale picture, I would save it, right? Stupid me, I didn't label it or anything. I just saved it, right? So, and then I had all these pictures, and I'm like, should share these, but I'd like to know more about these pictures because I know nothing about them. So I started researching some of the pictures, and I was like, hey, this is kind of cool. This belongs to this race, and that was an interesting story. And I started making all these connections, and I was like, I like this. This is pretty cool. And but in all honesty, a lot of the Facebook groups, because I thought about making a Facebook groups just to share this stuff. And the reason why I wanted my own is because a lot of the other Facebook groups, they're fan pages.
Yeah.
And I got nothing against fan pages. I love fan pages. But, you know, there's no historical context in a lot of the stuff that's posted there. And there's a lot of great digital art. People make these awesome collages and, you know, great stuff, but there's no historical value, right? And so I decided to make the Facebook group, the Dale Earnhardt Archive, and I deliberately used the word archive, so it has a sense of history to it, a sense of content. And my rule is, right, like if I try and post something, I want to know where it was taken, who's in the picture, and a photographer. If like those are those are the 3 main things that I want, and that way we can archive it, right? You can actually search, you know, Dominion 500, 1979 or whatever, right? And all these pictures or articles will pop up, right? And so I started doing that, and I was like, man, the format for Facebook is okay, but I want to do more.
Yeah.
And so that's why I started the WordPress site. And but I also wanted to just, you know, have conversations. And Facebook is great for conversations as well, but it's not as accessible as Twitter is, right? And you know, you get a different audience on Twitter because there's a lot of people on Twitter that aren't on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa. So I started the Twitter page, and that really took off. Met some pretty good people on Twitter, and so Twitter is my daily stuff. I just kind of throw stuff on there. If you want more meat and potatoes, you go to the Facebook group. The Facebook group is great because I don't post a lot there recently, but the stuff that I do post there is pretty good, and it generates some pretty good discussion because I have lots of former Richard Childress crew members involved as they've joined, right? So they chirp in every now and then, and just the conversation that's generated from those crew members. I even have one crew member, he's posted a bunch of his own personal pictures that he's had with Dale and over the years, and his story's pretty cool too. He was a fan of Dale's before he actually started working for Richard Childress, so that's pretty cool. But just some really neat things, and then I started the Instagram account about a year and a half ago maybe, and just to reach a larger audience. And I find that I get a lot of young people like yourself, and even people younger that are joining these groups and joining in on the conversation because they want to know more about Dale.
Yeah.
They want to know more about the history of NASCAR. And if, you know, look in the last 40 years, right? Dale has been a big part of that NASCAR history. I mean, even the last 20 years, he's still relevant. People are still talking about him. I mean, you know, his son probably has something to do with that, but regardless, he's still in the conversation 20 years after his death. So, and there's my story. That's how I got to where I am right now.
Yeah, and that's something I, you know, you touched on, wanting to make sure that it was, you know, something of substance there, and that was something that really, when I first found it, I gravitated it because, like you said, there's tons of pages out there that are just, you know, here's Dale Earnhardt's car, here's a Dale Earnhardt meme, but you don't really get any, you know, substance there. And when I started looking through your stuff, I was like, you know, first off, like you said, here's some people who were in, you know, were there when these things were happening. You know, you have Junior and Mike Davis follow you, so I'm like, you know, that's two like stamps of approval when you get Junior and him following you. And like I said too, when I first read it, I didn't think that you were writing it because there was so much stuff there. I was like, okay, there's probably copy and paste, and that's just, you know, to me, what's cool is when you look at something and go, wow, there's a lot here. You know, this isn't something that you assume just, you know, so your writing background gives some more context to that. But, you know, yeah, as a fan, that's something that I enjoyed, that I could spend days on your site instead of 20 minutes and saying, here's some cool photos.
Thanks. I appreciate that. But yeah, like you say, Dale Jr. and Mike Davis, and yeah, they follow me. It's kind of funny. A couple years ago, I got a message from Dale Jr.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, hey, this picture, and he sent me a picture that I had posted about a month earlier. He goes, this picture, you got any more from that photo shoot? And I'm like, yeah. Can you share them with me? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I sent them to him, and his reaction was great. Like there were pictures there that he had never seen before in that set. And so it was kind of cool that I was able to share that for him, or to give those to him, and you know, he could have relive some of those memories that those pictures were from. And yeah, it just his reaction was pretty cool. And ever since then, every time I find something that I think that he might not have seen before, that guy, he's seen a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
Everybody sends him stuff all the time, right? And but you know, just that give and take that we have. I even asked him for one picture once. I go, look, I'm trying to find this picture. Do you have a picture from this race? And he was like, yeah, man, here. And he sent it to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool, the whole sharing thing. And but it was pretty cool to have you know, Dale Jr. reach out and talk to me and you know, ask for some pictures. And that you know, was pretty cool. It made me realize that what I'm doing is at least in the right direction. It's in the right ballpark, right? Because if I got Junior paying attention to me, then, you know, I'm doing something at least right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think too, it speaks to how much stuff there is out there, because you look at someone who like Junior, who is just this huge historian, and you know, for our Instagram page, you know, we share a little bit of everyone, but there's people like, for me, I was a huge diehard Michael Waltrip fan, you know, ever since he was in the Napa car, and just yesterday I stumbled upon a truck he drove. And I'm like, I had no idea that he ever drove this. So it blows my mind, me sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I've watched every single race he's been in, you know, for the past 20 years. And it's just crazy even now stumbling upon stuff. And then even more so when you're dealing with someone like Earnhardt, who's got stuff from, you know, this huge backlog.
He's got, you know what, every week I'm finding something new. Whether the one thing I really like the most is, I mean, it's great having those professional photographer photos. There's some really good photographers that did great work back in the 80s and the 90s, at like Brian Cleary and David Chabot, and there's a bunch of other ones too. Their pictures are great, but what I really like are the fan photos. You know, the ones that are a little bit out of focus, or that you got the catch fence blocking the view a little bit, or you know, somehow or another they made it down into the driver introductions and they weren't supposed to be there, and you get the blurry photo. And I just love seeing those pictures because there's stories behind those pictures. There's the pictures of those pictures tell a story of the person, of the subject matter, but it also is the story of the person taking the picture.
Yeah.
Right. How they were in that position to take that picture and what happened before and after. I love hearing those stories. And that just perpetuates the memory of Earnhardt. It perpetuates the memory of NASCAR, and it perpetuates the history of NASCAR. And those pictures are awesome. And Facebook is great for those pictures. You can find them in a lot of the NASCAR groups, and every week there's somebody else who's just, I just found this page, and here are my pictures from 1987. And you just look at those pictures, and you look at this Jimmy Means picture of this car that you never knew he ever drove, or you look at like it's just an alternate paint scheme that somebody had for one race, like the green Folgers car back in the late 80s, right? Like it's just all these things just come popping up, and the fan photos of those are just great. They're incredible. And if they're Earnhardt, it's even better for me, right? Because it's just another photo for the collection, and if I can get the story that goes with it, that's great. Yeah.
You know, so speaking of, you know, researching and really diving in, has there been a random story, or, you know, maybe even picture that stands out as your favorite, that you know, wasn't aware that was out there or it happened, but you look at it and it's one of your favorites?
Yeah. Well, there's a few. I came across about a year ago a picture of Dale Earnhardt at Metrolina, and he's kneeling beside his car, and the story behind it is this guy who's walking by and he liked the car, and he knew who Earnhardt was. He was a 10-year-old kid, and he said, "Hey, can I take your picture?" And Earnhardt, yeah, okay. And he walked to his car and crouched down, put the arm on it, and gave the old, like, look. And I came across that picture and I was like, whoa, this thing is gold. And it's just a beautiful picture, and the story that the kid had, or well, now the adult had behind that picture, and just the look in Earnhardt's face, he just had this, I wouldn't say it was a cocky look, but he had like this look of like, pay attention, kid, because this picture is going to be worth something someday, right? And so, yeah, it's just pictures like that. One of the stories that I found kind of interesting, well, actually, there's a bunch, but 1980 almost didn't happen. Okay, so 1980, Dale Earnhardt wins the Rookie of the Year in 1979. In 1980, he wins the championship. At the beginning of that season, they had no money, and they didn't let anybody know. And so the Osterlin race shop, they were struggling. They weren't going to be able to run a full schedule, and they were only going to be able to run a handful of races. So they committed to running the first couple of races. So the first race back then was Riverside, and Osterlin did a favor for the track owner and made a second car for Dan Gurney. And Dan Gurney was running well, might have won the race actually if his transmission didn't blow up. And his car was identically prepared to Earnhardt's, and Earnhardt was running a good race too. And Earnhardt ran a good race. And then the following weekend, the following race was at Daytona. And so he ran the Busch race, or the Busch Clash, and won it. Can't tell you how much that helped the team, because A, they needed the money. B, they needed the recognition. And then they had a new sponsor in Mike Curb on the car for the Daytona 500. And Osterlin was also doing another favor for some more people and had Janet Guthrie in an identically prepared car as well. So the first two races of the season, Earnhardt had two teammates. Right? He had Dan Gurney and Janet Guthrie. And he went from no sponsor to a sponsor. And doing those favors kind of helped Osterlin land the sponsorship, because NASCAR saw what he was doing, and NASCAR approached Mike Curb and Warner Hodgkin and said, you know what, we can't have our Rookie of the Year running a limited schedule.
Yeah.
He needs to be full-time. Any help that you guys can do, that'd be great. And that whole little chemistry, or that whole little situation, and the fact that Earnhardt ran really well at Riverside and then won the Clash also helped. And I never knew any of that. I thought they were committed to run the whole season. I thought, and that was one of the reasons why he hadn't signed a contract yet. He agreed to a 5-year contract, but he hadn't signed it yet because they had no sponsor.
That stuff's crazy when you look back in history and you see how, if this thing would have went this way, then you wonder, like, well, what dominoes does that hit there? So that's just
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there would have been no 1980 championship, and who knows after that, right? Who knows if he would have got another break?
Yeah.
Right. So that's really interesting. It's that story kind of sat with me there for a little bit. So
I think it was last year they were running a like NASCAR was doing a what if scenario, and I believe one of them was I want to say it's Earnhardt doesn't go back to Childress, but it was just crazy because I think in their scenario they were like, all right, what if Earnhardt doesn't go back? What if Earnhardt doesn't have the success he has? And I just sit there and you at first you think, okay, if you take one guy from the sport, does it really change it? But then you start thinking, well, how many people have walked through Childress's doors? How many people went through DEI, either as a driver or working on the car? And that stuff just blows my mind, the what ifs of the sport.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can play what if all day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in '85, Rick Hendrick wanted Dale to go drive for him. I mean, you know, Dale well, Rick Hendrick had Robert G set up his car, which was Dale's, you know, ex father-in-law, right? And Dale did a whole lot of testing for that car. Like Dale got that car ready for Jeff Bodine, essentially, right? So I mean, there's a whole what ifs. What if he went there instead of Bodine, right? And then there's the whole Junior Johnson thing, right?
Yeah.
Because there, you know, depending on who you talk to, there's a couple of variations of the same story, but essentially the story is Junior Johnson wanted Dale Earnhardt to go drive for him as well in the mid 80s. So what if, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of what ifs. And for me, I'm just glad he ended up staying at Richard Childress and had the success he did and the career he did. Yeah.
So moving on, for you as a fan, so you know we've already passed the 20-year mark of his crash. What was kind of your experience like on February 18th, 2001?
Well, again, started off as a regular old, you know, Daytona 500. I had a couple friends over at the house, and we were watching the race, and yeah, the things are going great until that turn 4 there. And then at the end of the race, you know, it kind of like, you know, oh, where's Dale and that kind of stuff. And then I saw Kenny Schrader, and when they kind of interviewed him, and he's like, you know, oh, I don't know nothing about that stuff. I'm not a doctor, you know. And I was like, yeah, this isn't good. Didn't think he died. I thought he was messed up pretty bad. And that the 2001 season was probably a write-off. And then, I don't know, our cable provider ended the race, so or ended the telecast. So I didn't know that, I hadn't found out that Dale had died.
Yeah.
Later, I got a call at 7 o'clock at night from one of my friends that was at the house, and he was like, man, I just wanted to call and say I'm sorry. And I'm like, for what? He goes, you don't know? And I'm like, no. And he goes, well, Dale died. And I went, no. And he goes, yeah, man, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but so, you know, I went and checked the internet, and yeah, sure enough, Dale had died. That was sad. You know, I was a diehard fan. I had a lot invested in him as my driver.
Yeah.
You know, as much as I feel bad for myself and other fans, I felt even worse for Dale's family. I mean, you know, everybody can talk about how bad they were or how bad they felt, and, you know, how much their life changed and all that. But really, we're not as our sorrow over the situation doesn't nearly compare to what his family went through. And I felt really bad for the whole Earnhardt family. And yeah, to this day, I still do. And you know, it's a heck of a way to lose your father or husband, right? So but yeah, that's where I was, and that's how I found out. Man.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's, you know, growing up, I would hear people talk about, man, I knew where I was when this happened or that happened. And for me, that was one of those moments where we had to go up to visit our grandparents. So me and my dad, brother were in the car, and it, you know, 20 years ago, so I'm 9 years old sitting in the car, and it's one of the clearest memories where, you know, we're listening to the race, and as soon as they sit there and they say, and Earnhardt's in the wall, my dad, you know, lets out a couple of words, turns off the radio. We go up to see our grandparents, think nothing of it, because, you know, stuff like that doesn't happen. Yeah. And just the coverage, because, you know, for, like I said earlier, a lot of people that follow my page, they might be 15 or 16 years old, you know, so for them growing up, they're used to, you have the internet everywhere, Facebook, Twitter. So back then, like, you didn't have all those, you know, sources out there. And it was crazy then seeing how Dale was just everywhere. Like, the coverage was everywhere. And even now, looking back on it, and one of my friends in college, she grew up in Charleston, and she talked about how there was 4 churches in the area that had funerals for him. So for people who couldn't make it up to North Carolina. And I just, whenever people talk about like how big is the sport or how big was Earnhardt, that's what I bring up. And I'm like, there were churches that was not affiliated at all with the family, but still had their funeral for him. And, to me, it's just crazy looking back on the impact, and even 20 years later, how it's still, it's not like Earnhardt's name is slowly sliding away. I feel like he's just as popular as he ever was.
Yeah. It shows you the significance that he had, because I mean, yeah, he was a race car driver, but he kind of he was the face of NASCAR.
Yeah.
Going into 2001, and 2001 was the banner, the NASCAR's coming out party, right? It was like, look at us, and their star of their sport dies right on the very first race, the last lap of the first race. And yeah, I mean, and just what you said, right? He was everywhere after that. It was like, I mean, he was already everywhere. I mean, he was in movies. He was on cereal boxes. He was like, Don Hawk, right? It marketed him quite nicely, right? I mean, he was on chocolate bars, you name it, right? So he was already everywhere, but it was just amplified nth degree after he died, and it made people pay attention to the sport more. I think it drew people in, whether they stayed or not, I don't know. I think some of them would have stayed. I think they were like, oh yeah, this guy is huge, and look at all the. I'm going to go check this out. So I think he impacted the sport even that way. I mean, let alone the whole safety stuff. But even after his death, I think he was still bringing fans to the sport, or at least generating interest for the sport, and hopefully developing fans off of that. But I mean, I can't think of anyone else in any sport that had such an impact on the fans as Dale did. I mean, think of pro quarterbacks, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Dan Marino had a big fan base way back when, right? Or Brett Favre. I mean, he had a huge fan base as well. But I don't think those guys had nearly as big of a fan base as Earnhardt had. I mean, that whole persona, they marketed him well. They did a really good job. I mean, he had Nike. It just goes on and on and on. And it generated more interest from the sport. It generated more money for the sport. It generated more money for him. And it put his face out there. And just after he died, the impact, like you said, the churches, and it was felt everywhere. Right across the country. I mean, it was concentrated in the Southeast, mind you, but I mean, I got friends in California, and they were impacted just as much as the people in the Southeast, right? So, but it was more concentrated in the Southeast. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, with all that stuff with Earnhardt, you look at how he impacted people, just how much he meant to the sport, how iconic he was. And when you think Earnhardt, you think black number 3, come up behind you, intimidating you. What am I going to do to get out of his way? For you digging through all of the archives, and the photos, other than the black number 3, do you have a favorite Dell Senior paint scheme?
Yeah, well, the black number 3 is iconic. But we won't dwell on that.
Yeah, you always have to put that away and say, all right, except.
Well, you know what, though, right? I mean, he had that paint scheme since 1988, right? So he had that for more than half of his NASCAR career. But if you talk about if you include his one of paint schemes,
Mm-hmm.
then, there's several of them out there. I think one of the most significant paint schemes was the silver one,
Mm-hmm.
to mark Winston's 25th anniversary in the sport that he drove for the All-Star race.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a result of that, everything changed.
Mm-hmm.
All the All-Star races after that, everybody started jumping on the one of special paint schemes and all that. It was, I don't think they intended it for it to be a marketing uh, a marketing tool for them, or an income generating tool. I think when they created that, they were sincere in honoring Winston and
Mm-hmm.
giving them recognition for what they've done for the sport. But man, the demand for die casts and T-shirts and hats, and I want something with a silver car on it, and they realized, whoa, there's a money generating project right there.
Yeah.
And that's why they did it every year after that. I mean, they sold one of sponsorships, Bass Pro Shops and Wheaties and like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just, and then the money they created from die casts and other souvenir sales, and other teams jumped on it. So, I mean, as far as significant paint schemes go, I think that one was important, because it's even today, right? To this day, you think about what happened at Darlington, right?
Yeah.
All the throwback paint schemes. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad they're paying honor to previous race car drivers and team owners and all that, but they're also generating a lot of money off of it too, right? And it all started with that silver car. But my favorite paint scheme, 86, 87. The Wrangler car for 86, 87. That's for me. 84, 85 as well, I guess. But you had the Aero Coupe in 86, 87. But for me, that's the Dale Earnhardt has always been. He started off as blue and yellow. I found it ironic that he ended up with a sponsor that was blue and yellow as well. Yeah. And the sponsorship carried over. But yeah, this paint job for 86, 87, that's the one that stands out for me. As that's when I think Dale Earnhardt, when I first started, I think blue and yellow. I don't think black and silver.
Mm-hmm.
That's blue and yellow. That's the one. So.
Awesome. Well, Bob, I really love you coming on board. With this being the 20-year anniversary of Earnhardt's passing, I've been really trying to find some way to do a video to kind of discuss his legacy, share some stories. And when I came across your page, I was like, here's someone that I can interview and can share some stories, and not just be me and someone sitting around saying, oh, I remember when Earnhardt did this and I remember that, because there's tons of videos like that out there. But I think with this, along with your page, it's awesome getting to share stuff that you don't see just everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. I try to make you or make everything unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to create stuff. Well, I don't create it. I just find it and I write about it. Let's be honest. It was Dale that created everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I just try to put stuff out there that is significant towards the history of Dale, and that people will find interesting and come away knowing something that they might not have known before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole purpose behind the archive. And if anybody ever wants to share their stories with me, I'm more than willing to listen and write about it if you want me to. If it's a significant story that nobody's ever heard of, or if it is a significant story that everyone's heard of, but it's a different version of it from someone else's perspective, I'm all for it. I just love listening to the people who were there, who were in the know, who were part of it when it was happening. I could listen to those guys tell stories all the time, and just absorb it and
Mm-hmm.
know Dale a little bit better, and see what kind of race car driver he was, and the type of person he was with the teams and the crew members and the fans. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Bob, for those listening to this, where can they find you at online to check out these archives and all of this Earnhardt content?
Well, all you really have to do is if you want to go to Twitter or Instagram, just type in the Dale Earnhardt Archive.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go to Facebook, the Dale Earnhardt Archive as well. And WordPress, it's really easy. It's called the Dale Earnhardt Archive.wordpress. So I'm out there. I'm trying to unify my Twitter and Facebook handles, but they're not quite the same. But they all have archive DE in it somewhere. It's either DE archive or archive DE. So you can find me if you want. I can send a complete list to you, and you can when you edit this and post it, you can include it in your little commentary on YouTube. Oh, I'm on YouTube as well. Dale Earnhardt Archive YouTube. Yeah, I'm on there as well. I don't post a lot of content there. It's just me. So it's kind of hard to manage all these pages, but I do post content on there. I've got probably about 60 videos on there right now. So join me there too.
Yeah, so there you have no excuse not to check out some Dale Earnhardt Archives.
Exactly. We're trying to be everywhere for you.
All right, thank you, Bob.
Thanks. You have a good one now.